All right, good afternoon, She Sparks ladies. I was going to give it a few more minutes to see if anybody wanted to jump into the Zoom room, but if not, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to go ahead and just disclaimer ahead of time. I've got a little one that's not feeling so great at home with me right now. So if I have to make a quick exit, or if we just run out of time, I'm going to do a two-part series on this one because land buyers can get a little bit detailed. So I wanted to do a training specifically on working with the land buyer, just because so many of us have land buyer leads. Sometimes they're really low value, and some of us get very intimidated by them. But there is a way to manage these land buyer leads, to maximize your profits, and to do all the things you need to do. You know, really, like once you do a couple of these land deals, it just becomes second nature, just like it does with homes. It's not any easier or any harder, I don't think. It is just different. There's a ton of due diligence that goes into it. There's a lot of things that you need to check into, and we're going to go into that today. So land buyers, first things first, like with all clients, is your buyer consultation. So it's going to look very similar to your home buyer consult. So you want to know the location of the land. I'm just referencing my notes here. You want to know the size, what size parcel are they looking for? Oh, Jamaica's coming in. Hey, Jamaica. So you want to know what size parcel they're looking for. Of course, you want to know their price points. You want to ask them about restrictions. Do you want to be in to have a piece of land that has restrictions? Do you want to be in something that has an HOA? Do you want to be in something that has like a gated community? Or do you want to be in an unrestricted area? That's a very, very important question. Utilities. Are you somebody that needs to have public water and public sewer, or do you absolutely want a well, septic? Are you open to running power to the property, or do you want that there? Underground power or overhead lines? Okay. Internet. That's a big one here, at least in our market in Western North Carolina. Do you need high speed internet available? Or is janky satellite internet okay? So it just depends on what your buyer is looking for. And then the most important question that you can ask your land buyer during your buyer's consultation is, what do you want to do with the land? This is huge. This is going to really dictate your search. Okay, I want to buy it for my primary residence and build a home. Okay, great. I want to buy it and put yurts on it and short-term rent those out or turn it into a campground. That's going to be a whole different process that we're going to talk about. I want to buy it and put a mobile home on it. Okay, where is city or county zoning going to allow that? So what they want to do with the land is incredibly important. Even if it's as simple as like, I want to farm my land. Well, to what degree? And we need to make sure that zoning is okay with it. All right. The other question that I like to ask during the buyer's consultation is, how do you want the land to lay? So in our market, we're the mountains. So we have a lot of steep land, but we do have some pasture land. It is typically more costly, but that's a question that I like to ask people up front. What features do you want in the land? A stream, a creek, waterfront, views? Do you want paved road access? So those are the biggest points in the buyer's consultation. So make sure you ask those questions. So next, once you have all of those questions answered, and sometimes this is these are working questions. And once you, like with home buyers, once you start seeing properties, sometimes these things change. Like, I was totally fine with really rural, and then you took me to really rural, and I'm like, oh my God, never mind. Like, that's way too rural. So that might be a fluid thing. Just work with it. So after you do your buyer's consults, you're going to set up a search. Depending on where your buyer is, like if they're a hot buyer ready to buy the right piece of land tomorrow, that search might look different than somebody who is like me. I'm just kind of like looking casually. But always that first search, I do a very detailed MLS search where I dig through the MLS looking for all of the things that they specified. And it's not, a lot of times it's very difficult to set up an automated search for land buyers, because it's hard to put things on there like restrictions are okay, but only if it's regarding road maintenance, but no other restrictions. Like at least our MLS doesn't have where we can get that detailed. So I recommend a manual search. Now, if they're like not looking for like another year, then maybe put them on a drip, but or an automated search. But if they're ready to go, I would definitely, and always at least that first search, go through and hand pick out some really promising pieces of land. And then not only, so once you do your search, say you found this piece of property online or on the MLS that you think is good, you're going to have to do your own research from there. Don't take the listing agent's word for it. If the listing agent says no restrictions and your client wants no restrictions, don't stop there. Before you even send it to your client, go ahead and do your own search to see if you find any restrictions. And what that's going to look like is, of course, look in the MLS, look in the attachments. Then you're going to look at the deed. See if the deed has any restrictions, and if it does, pull those from public record. And then you're going to look at the county GIS and get real comfortable with these county GIS systems. So you're going to look in the county GIS and see how the property is zoned. So somebody might want to be in an unrestricted property, and it's not in an HOA. Great, check. Step 1. There's no deed restrictions. Great, check. Step 2. But you look at the GIS and it looks like it's in city limits. So the city is going to have regulations. You can't put roosters in the city limits. So again, this is all going to come back to what do your clients want to do with the property. So when you're looking at specifically restrictions, because that comes up all the time, there are 3 layers of restrictions that you need to look at. Are there neighborhood or HOA restrictions? Step 1. Are there deed restrictions? These can be different. Even something that's not in a neighborhood can have deed restrictions. And then step 3, what are the local jurisdictions of county or city zoning regulations? Do that due diligence before you even send the property to the client, because there's nothing more disheartening than like a client getting a piece of property. I love it. It checks all the boxes. And then you're like, oh, actually it doesn't. Never mind. We can't look at it. So do that ahead of time. Let's see what else. So everybody knows there are a bajillion land properties out there. So you really want to narrow this down because it can get incredibly overwhelming and intimidating for that land buyer. So you might do your initial search and see 3,000 results. You don't have enough parameters in there. Narrow it down and just keep working with your buyer. If you can't get it narrowed down from 3,000, you haven't asked enough questions. Ask more questions. So really narrow it down. You don't want to send them more than 5 to 10 really great qualified properties. Otherwise, it just gets overwhelming. Who the heck can keep more than 10 straight? Okay, so now you do your search. You've sent them 5 to 10 really good prospects. Now you guys want to see the land. So there's 2 ways that you can do this, and it's going to totally depend on what type of land. And it's going to depend on the type of land buyer too. And the more you do this, the more comfortable you can get with this process and kind of feel it out. First and foremost, download LandGlide. I don't care what market you're in. I think it's in all states. Download LandGlide. It's the best investment you'll ever make. It's an app. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's like $12 a month. I tried to go without it for a long time, and I was like limping along. So this thing is the greatest ever. It's this app right here. Don't mind all my notifications, but there. So $12 a month. What you can do, and before you go out to visit land property, pull them all up in LandGlide and download the offline maps for it. That way, when you're out on the land, likely without signal, or maybe you have signal, but if you don't have signal, you can still see the property lines and where you are in relation to the property lines. Now, I always say, disclaimer, client, this is not a survey. This just goes off the county GIS, but it is much better than walking around like, I don't know, this could be it. There's no real estate sign. LandGlide, it is a land saver. It's a lifesaver. There's like a little blue dot, which is you, where you're holding your phone, and it follows you around the property. So you can kind of like, if there's a stream somewhere on the property, you can try to walk to find it. It truly is a must-have. So get LandGlide on your phone, download the maps offline, and then like getting to the property. A lot of times the MLS will have written out directions from the listing agent, but if they don't, again, you've already pulled this up on GIS. So maybe look to see if there's an established home somewhere near it that you can type in that property address, because raw land does not typically have a 911 address already. It's usually got like 9999 Silver Creek Road. That's not going to pull up in your GPS. So, or worst case scenario, you can GPS to Silver Creek Road and then have your land glide pulled up and, you know, go until you see your blue dot right next to the property on land glide. Sometimes, again, depending on the buyer, sometimes I'll have my buyers do a drive-by prior to me going out with them. And it just totally depends. Like if they're very specific, like we don't want a, I don't know, like a home with a bunch of junk yard, like junky cars out in the yard near us, then I can't, there's no amount of research that I can do from my computer that will tell me if that's the case or not. So sometimes I'll have my clients do a drive-by first. If they like the general surrounding area, then we'll go and walk the land together. Not always. And it usually, at least the first time, I try to go with my clients because they don't know how to use land glide. They don't know how to see the property lines. You know, it's really most of the time very important that you go with them even to land properties. And of course, especially those in gated subdivisions, you can't give them the gate code. You just need to go with them. It's really hard for buyers, especially if they've never built before or bought raw land before, to really know what they're doing. They're looking to you for that. So it seems easy just to say, yeah, go check out the land by yourself. It's vacant, it's raw land, who cares? No, try to go with them. And it doesn't need to be overwhelming because you've already done all of your research and you've only sent them really qualified properties. All right. And just be prepared, just like you would for a home showing. You just need to be prepared for those land showings. You need to know how to get there. So pull that up ahead of time, print the MLS sheet. I've done this. I'm so guilty of this. Print the MLS sheet because half the time I don't have signal and then I'm like, yeah, they said something about a septic permit, I can't remember. So just print the MLS sheet and just, you know, be able to show them where the property lines are roughly. And if you don't know the answer to a question, but that you're definitely going to need to know where the rough property lines are. That's why else are you going to see the property in person? But otherwise, if they start asking you questions like, oh, would the zoning people allow me to put 3 tiny homes instead of 2? Just defer. I'll get an answer for you on that. Okay, so that's your consultation. That's your search in the MLS, and that is searching to see property. So now you've done that. They found the property. They want to put an offer in on it. So now we're going to talk about an offer on a land property. I think it's going to depend on your state. In North Carolina, we have a completely different offer form for it. It looks very, very similar to the standard offered purchase for a home, but there's just a few different things. It's not overwhelming. Just if you have a mentor in your state that can help you with it, just talk to them about it. If you're in North Carolina, ask me. I've done a quadrillion of these things. The biggest thing about putting in a land offer is make sure you leave yourself enough time on the contract. So we're a due diligence state in North Carolina, so, or whether you're a repair state, whatever you are, make sure you leave yourself enough time on the contract to do your due diligence. So you're going to need to figure out before you write up a contract, how long it's going to take you if you need a survey, how far out our surveyors booked. Like ours are booked at least 2 months. So if my people want a survey, I'm going to ask them that before we go under contract. And I'm going to make sure we have enough time for it. And then the other big thing, at least in our market, to make sure you have enough time for is your septic permitting. If it's not on city sewer, you want to make sure you leave enough time to get the perk test done on the soil. And that varies per county. I'm doing one right now in Polk County, and the septic people are only like 3 weeks out, which is phenomenal. I've got another one under contract in Transylvania County, and they're 12 weeks out. So you got to have to call the county environmental health folks again prior to putting in an offer. So it's a little bit of due diligence. I'm telling you, if you can do this due diligence ahead of time, it saves you a bunch of headache and a bunch of time and less terminations. If you can figure this out ahead of time, you're not going to have a termination unless, you know, something terrible happens, whatever, fails a perk, you name it. So, so that's the big thing. Make sure you have enough time on your contract for your land. And then depending on your state, there is probably an additional form that says if you want to get a perk test done, meaning it doesn't have city sewer or public sewer, so you need to get the land perked, which means it's like a percolation test. And this is where either the county or a private soil scientist comes out, they dig some holes and they say, it's not this simple, it's complicated, and you got to mark house sites and you get better at them. But anyways, they come out, they dig some holes, and they tell you if the land is suitable for a septic system. So in North Carolina, we have like a separate form for that, an additional provisions addendum form that basically says, hey, Mr. Seller, we're going to do this. Do we have permission to, this is you signing this form, Mr. Seller, is giving us permission to have holes dug on your property. So make sure that your state, if you've got that form, make sure it's a part of the contract. And I'm sure that it is. And a lot of times when you go ahead and do the septic application for the county, like I just did one for my client, it's going to ask for the owner of the land to sign off on it. So I had to send it over to the listing agent. She had the seller sign off on it, and then I could submit it to Polk County to ask them to start the septic permitting process. The other part of your land offer, are you cash or are you loan? Cash, that's just cash. If you're a loan buyer, talk to the lender and make sure that the piece of property meets the lender's requirements. There are not a whole ton of lenders that will do land loans, specifically just land, not a construction loan. We can get into that maybe on another call. But specifically land loans, there's not a lot of lenders that do them. If you need help with some, we've got, I think a lot of the girls in this group can make some recommendations. But a lot of the land lenders will have like a minimum requirement, like they're not going to loan on land if the loan value is less than 60,000, or if there's an old mobile home on the property that they're not giving any value to, they may not loan on that. So just make sure that if you've got a loan land buyer, that you've communicated with that lender to make sure that not only are you checking all the boxes for your buyer, but for their loan product as well. And again, make sure that you leave enough time on the contract for that lender. Lender, do you need an appraisal? Okay, great. How long do your land appraisers take? I did one before. This was like one of my first deals. So it was a big learning curve. And it was a loan land buyer, a big parcel, I don't know, like 46 acres. And the lender required a survey and an appraisal. And the land appraisal took like 4 months. It was crazy. Thankfully, the listing agent and the seller were very gracious and we were able to extend, but I should have done that due diligence ahead of time. All right. So you've written your offer, you've left enough time, you've got your additional, whatever your addendum looks like if you need a septic system, now you're under contract. So the biggest thing, aside from doing your homework up front, is just keeping track. There's a lot to do. I think there's probably more to do when you've got land under contract than when you have a home under contract. Home under contract, you know what kind of home inspections that you should do or you recommend to your clients. Land, it just totally depends on that specific land buyer. So what I recommend is a spreadsheet. I've got one. Corey and I've done a couple of land deals together. I love it. I will share it. I'll post it in the group so you can see it, adjust it to your market, because you're going to see things like due diligence period in there that may not be applicable in your market. So you are under contract. You need to, this is your time to make sure you cross your T's, dot your I's, and save every email. So one of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to send your executed contract to either your attorney, if you're an attorney state, or to title, if you're in a title state. And I put some of that, not burden, but I put some of that responsibility onto the attorneys in our state. So if I know that my client, so for example, I keep coming back to my one in Polk County right now. I know that my client wants to put a mobile home on that property. So I already reached, when I sent the contract over to the attorney, I said, hey, can you please verify that when you do your title search that there are not any regulations that would prevent my client from putting a mobile home on this property. And so I put part of that on the attorney, and she's going to search through the deeds. She's going to search through restrictions. She's going to make sure that they can do everything that they want to do with that property. And now that I'm looking at this, I'm wondering if I should do land contract for another day, because it gets pretty in-depth and onerous, and I don't want to rush through it. I want to make sure we leave enough time for Q&A, and then I can share the spreadsheet, because there's a ton of details that go in that. So maybe we'll just do this. We'll do this as part one. So part one, we've got the buyer consult and the offer, and then I'll do a follow-up of part 2, which is going to include the land when you've got under contract and how do you get it from contract to close. Just don't want to rush through that part. So if anybody, let me pop into Facebook to make sure I'm not missing any Facebook Live questions. 1 second.
Didn't catch what you said. If the land doesn't pass the perk test, was it like just moving on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll touch on that a bit more when we get into the land contract part. But so there's a couple things. It depends on what degree it doesn't pass a perk test. So sometimes it doesn't pass a perk test. So like when you do a perk test, when you submit it to the county, you have to say, how many bedrooms does your buyer want? Hey, Mr. Buyer, like my guy, how many bedroom mobile home do you want? 3. Great. So we applied for a 3-bedroom septic permit. Sometimes it's varies. Sometimes the perk people will say, well, it won't qualify for a 3-bedroom, but it'll qualify for a 2. And then at that point, you have a conversation with your buyer. Okay, Mr. Buyer, we can't put as big of a septic system in. Are you fine with that? Sometimes it'll say it won't perk for a conventional system, but it will perk for an engineered system. Okay, Mr. Buyer, it won't, this is what it'll do. It'll perk for an engineered system. Here's some septic contractors. This is the cost roughly of an engineered system. Does that fit into your budget? Yes, no, maybe. And, then you can always use that too. Like if it allows for an engineered system, you can go back to the listing agent and say, hey, I know we're under contract for whatever, $50,000. The perk came back that it will not qualify for a conventional system, which is what my client budgeted for, but it will only come back for an engineered system, which is, and I'm totally ballparking here, I don't have a clue, $20,000 more than my client thought it was going to be for septic. We would like a $20,000 price reduction. They might tell us to go fly a kite, but you could totally use that as a negotiating tool. And then if it doesn't perk whatsoever, like if the county, this has never happened to me where it's never perked whatsoever. A lot of times the county will say, it's not going to perk in this location, but it will perk up here. And it won't, so I've never had it where it hasn't perked whatsoever, but if it does, all you can do is just relay that information to your client. Mr. Client, the county is telling us that this is not going to perk for a septic system. Do you want to proceed with purchasing this land? I can't imagine that they would, unless they're using it just for like privacy next to their own home or privacy next to another lot or just to hunt on it or something like that. But I mean, otherwise they're not going to be able to put a septic system in there. So unless there's public sewer. But yeah, that's pretty much it if it fails a perk test. But I've never seen it where it completely fails, just maybe varying degrees. Do you got any other questions, Shamika? Okay, I don't think I've got any questions in Facebook Live here. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it up now. I know it's been about 25 to 30 minutes of tons of information, so I don't want to overwhelm everybody. So I will come back and do a part 2. Actually, I can probably even do it later this week. I'll do a part 2 with once we get under contract for the land and getting it contract to close. So I'm here for everybody. If you ever have a question about any part of the land process, but specifically what we talked about today, the consultation, the search, site visits, and the offer, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you no matter what market, what state you're in. I think a lot of the same principles apply. So as always, I'm here for you. And thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Jamika.
Thank you.